Ethan Carter, a skilled hacker, had always been drawn to the darker corners of the internet. He made a name for himself in the underground community by unearthing secrets that most would prefer remain hidden. But one night, while browsing a particularly obscure and encrypted forum on the dark web, he stumbled upon something far more dangerous than anything he had ever encountered before. A file simply labeled Project Orion. The file was deeply encrypted, more so than anything he had ever seen. It took days for Ethan to break through the multiple layers of security, and as he did, a sense of dread grew within him. This was no ordinary piece of data. When he finally decrypted the file, the contents left him reeling. It was a detailed dossier on a vast conspiracy involving global leaders, powerful corporations, and an enigmatic organization known as the Syndicate. The documents outlined the Syndicate's far-reaching influence, manipulating economies, rigging elections, and suppressing technological advancements to maintain their grip on power. Ethan's initial curiosity turned to horror as he realized the extent of their operations. But the most chilling part was the list of people the Syndicate had eliminated to protect their secrets: journalists, whistleblowers, and hackers, many of whom had simply vanished or died under mysterious circumstances. As Ethan scrolled through the names, his heart nearly stopped when he saw his own alias included among the targets. They knew who he was, they knew he had accessed their secrets, and now they would stop at nothing to silence him. In a panic, Ethan copied the files onto a heavily encrypted hard drive, ensuring that only he could access the data. But the realization that he was now a marked man left him with few options. The Syndicate had eyes everywhere, and it wouldn't be long before they came for him. His once safe world had been shattered, replaced by a terrifying reality where every move he had made could be his last. As the days passed, Ethan became increasingly paranoid. He noticed unfamiliar cars parked near his apartment, received strange, silent calls, and felt the unnerving sensation of being watched. The Syndicate was closing in. Desperation led him to reach out for help, but who could he trust? Every option seemed fraught with danger. Then one night, a message appeared on his screen. It was from an anonymous source, someone who claimed to be an ally. The message was simple but urgent: get a burner phone and wait for further instructions. It was a lifeline, but also a gamble. Ethan knew that whoever sent it could be his only hope. Ethan followed the instructions, buying a burner phone from a nondescript store in a part of a town where no one asked questions. The phone was cheap, basic, and untraceable, just as he needed. His hands shook as he activated it, waiting for the next move from his mysterious contact. He couldn't help but feel the weight of the decision he was making. Trust was a rare commodity in his world, and he was gambling his life on it. A text arrived shortly after he turned on the phone. The sender identified himself as Agent Novak, a former intelligence officer who had allegedly turned rogue after discovering the Syndicate's operations. According to Novak, he had been working from the inside to bring them down, and now, with Ethan's discovery, they had the chance to expose the Syndicate once and for all. Ethan was skeptical. The story sounded too convenient, too perfectly timed, but Novak seemed to know things only someone with inside knowledge could. Details about the Syndicate's methods, their operatives, and even specific names that Ethan had seen in the files. Novak offered a way out. If Ethan could deliver the hard drive, Novak would ensure his safety and help him disappear. For days, Ethan wrestled with doubt. Every instinct told him that trusting a stranger could be his undoing, but the alternative was equally grim. He couldn't keep running forever, and he certainly couldn't expose the Syndicate on his own. Finally, with no other option, he agreed to meet Novak. The location was a rundown motel on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where people went to be forgotten. Ethan arrived early, scanning the area for any signs of a trap. The parking lot was nearly empty, save for a few cars that looked like they hadn't been driven for years. The motel itself was a relic from another time, its faded sign flickering weakly in the dusk. Ethan checked into the room Novak had specified, his nerves on edge. The room was dimly lit, and the wallpaper peeling, and the bed sagging in the middle. It was the kind of place that reeked of desperation and secrecy. Fitting, he thought, for what might be his last stand. The hours ticked by slowly, each one dragging on longer than the last. Ethan paced the room, checking his phone every few minutes, waiting for Novak to arrive. Finally, as the sky outside turned a deep, inky black, there was a knock at the door. Ethan's heart leaped into his throat as he approached, peering through the people. Standing outside was a man in his late 40s, dressed in a worn leather jacket. His face was stern, his eyes sharp and calculating. Ethan hesitated for a moment, then slowly opened the door. "Ethan Carter?" the man asked, his voice low and steady. Ethan nodded. "You must be Novak." The man gave a curt nod. "Let's talk inside." Ethan stepped aside to let him in. his mind racing with a mixture of hope and dread. He was about to find out if he had made the right choice or sealed his fate. Inside the dingy motel room, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Novak wasted no time getting to the point. "The hard drive," he said, his voice carrying the weight of urgency. "You have it?" Ethan nodded, pulling the small black device from his bag and placing it on the rickety table between them. Novak's eyes locked onto it, his eyes, an expression unreadable. Ethan could feel the pressure building inside him. This moment could determine everything. Novak leaned forward slightly, his gaze intense. "Do you understand what you have here? This is the key to bringing down one of the most powerful organizations in the world, but it also is the only thing keeping you alive. Without it, the Syndicate will have no reason to let you walk away." Ethan swallowed hard. "I just want this to be over," he admitted, the fear and exhaustion evident in his voice. "I can't keep living like this." Novak nodded, his face softening slightly. "I get it. You've been through hell, but we can't let our guard down now. First, I need you to decrypt the files so I can verify what we're dealing with. Once that's done, we can move forward." Ethan hesitated, his instinct screaming at him to stop. The encryption was his last line of defense, the only thing preventing the Syndicate from accessing the data. But Novak had come this far, and Ethan knew that he had no other options. He had to trust him. With a deep breath, Ethan pulled out his laptop and connected the hard drive. His fingers moved quickly over the keyboard, entering the complex code that would unlock the data. As the files opened the screen, Novak leaned in, scrutinizing the information with a sharp, calculating gaze. "It's all here," Novak muttered, more to himself than to Ethan. "Everything we need to take them down." For a brief moment, Ethan felt a glimmer of hope, but that hope was shattered in an instant. As Novak straightened up, his demeanor shifted abruptly. His hand moved to his jacket, and before Ethan could react, Novak had pulled out a gun, aiming it directly at him. Ethan's blood ran cold. What are you doing?" he stammered, backing away in terror. "This was all a setup, Ethan," Novak said, his voice cold and devoid of the earlier warmth. "The Syndicate knew you had the files. They sent me to retrieve it. You served your purpose." The realization hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. He had been played. Everything, the text, the promises, the reassurances, had all been a ploy to get the data back. The fear that had gnawed at him for days now consumed him completely. There was no escape. "Please," Ethan whispered, his voice trembling. But Novak's expression remained cold, merciless. He had walked right into their trap, and now he was at the mercy of a man who had been lying to him from the start. Novak motioned with the gun, and Ethan had no choice but to follow his orders. They left the motel room, the cold night air biting at Ethan's skin as they walked toward the edge of the nearby forest. Darkness seemed to swallow them whole as they entered the dense woods, Novak's gun never leaving Ethan's side. The forest was eerily quiet as Novak led Ethan deeper into the trees. The only sounds were the crunch of leaves underfoot and the occasional rustle of branches in the wind. Ethan's mind raced, searching for a way out, but the realization that he was completely at Novak's mercy left him paralyzed with fear. The gun pressed into his back was a constant reminder of the gravity of his situation. They had reached a small clearing and Novak stopped, turning to face Ethan with a cold, calculating expression. "This is where it ends, Ethan," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "You took a risk and it didn't work out. Now you're gonna pay the price." Ethan's knees felt weak as he realized the full extent of his mistake. He had been so focused on finding a way out, on trusting Novak as his only hope, that he walked right into the Syndicate's trap. The weight of that realization pressed down on him, suffocating in its finality. Novak cocked his gun, the sound echoing through the clearing like a death knell. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, his breath coming in shallow gasps. He could barely process what was happening, the fear and adrenaline making it hard to think, hard to breathe. Ethan's mind flashed to the moments that had led him here, finding the file, the growing paranoia, the desperate decision to trust Novak. It all seemed so clear now. The signs he had missed, the red flags he had ignored in the desperation. He had been out of his depth from the start, and now he was paying the ultimate price. Novak's hand tightened on the gun, his finger hovering over the trigger. "You should have known better, Ethan. The Syndicate doesn't leave loose ends." Ethan closed his eyes, his body trembling as he braced himself for the inevitable. There was nothing left to say, no last-minute plea that could save him. He had played the game and lost, and now he was at the mercy of a man who had no intention of letting him walk away. The forest around them was deathly silent, the air thick with tension. Time seemed to slow to a crawl as Ethan stood there, waiting for the final crushing blow. The sound of his own heartbeat filled his ears, drowning out everything else. And then, the birds in the surrounding trees took off in a flurry of wings and startled cries, fleeing the scene as the sound of the gunshot echoed through the night. The silence that followed was heavy, oppressive, as if the very earth had paused to acknowledge what had just happened. On that note, that wraps up this story. If you haven't already, I would appreciate if you would like and subscribe. Also, leave a comment on any stories you want me to bring to life. But other than that, while this story may come to an end, the start of another begins.